Hi guys, welcome back to my hard mode playthrough. In case you didn't see the first video, this isn't really a let's play. I am absolutely god awful at doing let's plays. This is more me narrating a playthrough that I did on hard mode. It's meant to be a guide in the sense that it might help you to not make the mistakes that I make, but just maybe see the process that I went through to do things, and it might potentially help you, and it might just be interesting to watch. On the previous video, the plan was to get the base set up for winter. I went for getting electricity up before anything else. I really beelined for that. And I also wanted to get a flamethrower defense up early because it is hard mode. That did push my clothing creation back quite far, but it ended up working out the way I wanted it to, which was that people didn't need to leave the base for the base to function. So no one had to go and collect sticks, no one had to refuel anything. And it also reduced the workload. What you can see here is that I am gradually starting to clear out where the old base was, and the plan for the next plan for this game was for me to get a crafting hall up and to get up the ability to go exploring, and also get kind of the farms really nailed down and get them enclosed. Now I'm going to say early that my original plan with the farms didn't work out so well. I did get quite a lot done, and it also took me a god-awful time to get my crafting hall up. Probably won't get it up in this video because my plan with the farms made my life so hard that I had to just really sort of problem solve that issue. And also, as I was problem solving that issue, we had the patch hit. I'll probably show how that went in the next video, because that was basically 3 years of me just problem solving. So yeah, not real years, game years. Felt like it. Once I had my base running quite smoothly and I didn't need Emily running around like a blue ass fly to keep everything moved and get things out of the storages, I decided that I was going to use her to do a fair bit of research over the winter. Obviously I wanted to get to the point of doing exploration, but I also wanted to work towards like needed things. So obviously a freezer is a needed thing. I did want to get myself the ability to make medkits, and those graphene panels. One of the things that I really wanted to do in this game was to try to minimize the amount of things that could go wrong, because I thought that I'd probably have quite a lot of people that were injured quite regularly, and I wanted to make sure that there was a minimal amount of repairing that needed to be done, at least until I had enough survivors to really run the base well. Seeing as I had Emily doing a task that I needed her to be doing that for quite a long time, I switched up her schedule here, and as you can see, I just made her relaxed time overlap with the relaxed time of when people are getting up. So when she's going to bed, she is going to be having her food, they're going to be getting up and having her food, and then when she gets up, she will cook food, and she'll do that until everyone goes to sleep, and that gives her the entire night to research. It also means that her research won't be interrupted in the morning when everyone gets up to eat. So she just does all the cooking in the evening, and then she can research all the way through to the morning. It may seem like a waste of a CPU, but I decided to make a thermostat early just so that I could really reduce the amount of electricity used for the heaters, and therefore run my base on far less electricity needs. It actually worked out quite useful in the future when I started expanding the base. It just meant that I could really reduce my electricity needs, and I did this as well by using a daylight sensor later on. As you can see, I did get an attack at this point, and I actually did something really dumb. I didn't see how many of those creatures were there, so Ken ended up getting kind of foobarred. One of the silver lining of this is that when the attack did come in, I got to see how well it worked if no one was there to actually man it at this point. I was frantically scrambling, getting Lara to repair this fence though, because the attack was incoming. I thought, yep, I'm going to have to say in the next video, sorry guys, I had to reload the save, but it actually worked out okay. Even though she drew some aggro, the majority of stuff did go through the flamethrowers there, and I just drew them in like that. And yeah, I don't know if she actually took damage from the flamethrower there, she might have, but she dealt with it okay, so yeah, it wasn't too bad. At this point the attacks really weren't that bad. I didn't have enough defenses up and enough building to really trigger off massive attacks. I'm just saying this now, that's some foreshadowing. You may have noticed that I haven't really been talking about hunting animals, and the reason for that is that I've just been sticking with glitter caps to this point, and I actually decided to go purely for harvested things. I really didn't want to mess around with that because once again, it was with the view that I might potentially not have people able to go out and do hunting. So I didn't really want to be relying on that. I wanted to build my base around the idea of not having to use any sort of animal products for food. But obviously I do want some leather, so I have been sending them out hunting here and there. But you may also notice that I've already got like 5 fermentation barrels set up. The reason for that is that I got myself the fermenting fuel tech as a breakthrough at the start of the game. So I plan to use insect meat to actually provide for all my fuel needs, so I really didn't need to go and hunt meat. I will say that actually ended up being, once again, quite prophetic in the fact that because of the changes to the attacks, I ended up getting a lot more large animal attacks, which made that actually quite efficient. One of the things I just wanted to highlight here was that even though the base hasn't particularly changed over the course of the winter and it really was just ticking over, I did go out of my way to make sure that I had the punching bag, the shooting target and the dartboard set up. Even though I'm only cooking one type of food, that negative for having a lack of food variety is easily offset by both Emmeline's buffs and the fact that they've got their own room, they've got nice heating in the room, and they've got all of the relaxation things that I could build at this point, except for I didn't have some couches for them to sit on. Once I got into year 2 and I knew that I had quite a lot of time before the next winter, I decided it was time to really start concentrating on getting some weapons. I wasn't really worried about melee attacks. I knew that I could draw them into my kill box, but my big fear was the shriekers. I know that those things have got quite a long attack range, so I went for the short bows with that. They did actually end up working pretty damn well when I got everyone to use them, but you'll see later on in the video that my biggest mistake was really scaling up the attacks too quickly, and I really didn't account for how many shriekers there would be. You'll see that in a little bit later on. To further demonstrate that, as you can see, I did have an attack of 56 of the bugs coming in, and I actually pulled my people all the way back, and I just wanted to see what happened. And yeah, they were easily dealt with just a couple of flamethrowers and some traps in front of them. That I was very confident at that point that I'd be able to deal with any sort of melee attack. Little did I know that things were going to change fairly soon when that patch hit. One of the things that I've been doing in my games is I've not completed my exploration research and started putting down a balloon until I know that I have the products to, or the materials to actually build the balloon and to completely fuel it. I've noticed that whenever you do start building the balloon, that's when you usually get your first sort of survivor event. Now in this one, I actually got really lucky. I got one where the survivor just turns up on your doorstep. But most of the time, as you're in the process of building your balloon, you will have an event start which will say, oh, there's a flare or smoke signals or something like that. And you only have a couple of days to do it. So it's really important to make sure you do have the ability to build and refuel that balloon. Now, as you can see here, I actually got really lucky here. And it was just someone was joining the group. So that wasn't a problem. Which is good because I had Ken dealing with those hungry pests. I decided to make Naras my primary farmer and also have him as a backup researcher, and then if he couldn't do research or farming, he'd go off and do delivering as well. I actually ended up changing this quite a bit throughout the course of the gameplay, but at this point here I was really focused on getting my farming up and going because I wanted to make sure that I had the products to make electronics, and I also wanted to be able to get synthetic leather. The synthetic leather just didn't become an issue later on. I just completely abandoned that. And later on I did get another survivor, so really the farming wasn't so much of an issue either. Like, I really overestimated how much farming I needed to do, and it turned out I needed to do much less than I thought I did. I really hadn't taken into account the effect that having so much 100% farmland would have, and also the fact that I did have crops. I had the nice grain crops, for example, and I had the nice hay crops. So yeah, I just really was going on automatic with that. Just a side note here is if you have built your base in a way that can be expanded later on and your plan is to have a hallway that goes all the way through, might be a good idea not to cover that area up with shells. Just throwing it out there. I actually got really lucky with this one because as I was building the balloon, I got a signal rocket expedition and I got another survivor from doing that. So that meant that I had 6 survivors and I could play around with them as I needed. I did end up, I believe I made Vanessa into, well, basically Vanessa and Naras, I spent quite a bit of time throughout this playthrough actually trying to figure out what I wanted to do with them. Initially, I had Vanessa as like a crafter and researcher, and I had kind of completely missed the fact that she doesn't like crafting. So later on, I switched them over, and Naras was the crafter. He was also the researcher when I chose to do research. I'm sure you can tell by me saying that is I don't tend to go balls to the wall when it comes to research. I do it as I need. For me, the biggest priority is to always get the base up and going. I can add more research in as I need it. But the biggest thing is get the base going, get your defenses set, then you can min-max. So at this point, everything was looking really good. But what you're about to see is a series of mistakes that made my life way harder than it needed to be. It'd be very easy for me to just, skip forward and go, yeah, I did this and this dealt with everything perfectly fine. But the thing is this is a guide channel. And what I want to do is, even though this is going to make me look really stupid, at least if you look at this and you've watched this and you go, yeah, I've got to make sure I don't pull a whammy next time you're doing a base, then I've kind of achieved what I wanted to do. But with that said, I was not just purely derping out here. One of the things that I was particularly worried about in this game was the idea that I was going to be attacked by shriekers at some point. Now, I'm not worried about the melee side of things, so any creature that was purely on melee, I really wasn't worried. I knew I could draw it into my flamethrowers. Later on, when I had turrets, I knew that I would be able to draw them into the turrets just by the positioning of the turrets. By having the turrets closer to the inner walls where the flamethrowers are, then the creatures would come round and they would try and get the turrets and they'd stand in front of the flamethrowers. It wasn't going to be a problem. Shriekers, though, were another thing completely. And I knew that setting up a defense that was going to enable me to deal with them was going to take a while. I needed to get turrets up, I needed to get fortifications up and all that sort of thing. On top of that, I wanted to make sure that I had ample amounts of farmland in case anything went badly and animals did get into my farms. I wanted to have backup farms, just so there was always enough stuff for me to harvest if I want to. So for that reason, what I decided to do was try and turn my farmland into both a good safe area to keep animals out, but also have it as like a backup defense point. The idea was that if I built a big wall around a lot of farmland and then I put these big spurs on the outside, I could line the wall with traps, and then I could have farms on the outside that I didn't harvest, so that the creatures would come up against the wall and they'd hit the traps, and they would only try and get through the wall once they hadn't eaten at the farms and they'd hit the traps. And I thought that what I could do with those big spurs is I could set up some motion sensors so that things would only trigger off the motion sensor if they were inside those spurs, and then if anything was going towards the front of the base, it would be guided outside the area of that. It also meant that if I did have shriekers coming in, until I had a good defense, if I walked into this area here, because it was walled off, it would mean that they would try and get my survivors inside there. I could lead them into the traps, and then when they got into the traps, they'd be inside the range of the turrets, and until I had turrets, I could just deal with them as they were on the traps. The problems with this are threefold. The first one is that I didn't need anywhere near that amount of farmland. I think currently where I am in the game, I've got 2 10x5 fields of each of the products, and yeah, that's more than enough. I still don't have to harvest everything. Secondly, I didn't need that many traps to stop. I only needed one line of traps, and I've never had a single creature try and go through that wall since I put those traps out. And the last thing is, by having such a large area that I put traps around, I vastly increased the amount of enemies that spawned. I went from having like 60 enemies spawn, and it ramped up so quickly to like over 150, and as soon as I started putting turrets down, it hit like 170 enemies. And I'm sure you can tell that when I did finally get shriekers, that meant I got way more than I would have normally got, which made it quadruply self-defeating. Whereas it might have been, I don't know, maybe a dozen that I would have had before. This time I got, I think it was like 40 or 50 of them I got on my first shrieker spawn. The thing is that until that spawn actually happened, I was blissfully unaware. I just started building my crafting hall. I like to go for the maximum length that you can build and then go for 7 wide. It means that I can just put lights in the middle and there's more enough room to have 2 rows of tables, and I can make things working really nice and smoothly. I can have 1 tailoring bench for each of the different parts that I'm building. I can have a couple of soldering benches. I've got room in there for printers and things like that. I also did extend out my electrical grid to my farms, and I put out a couple of lightning rods. I will say, if you've never done it before, just do make sure that you do put lightning rods out near your farms, especially ones that people are going to be in a lot. It's maybe something you don't think about, but yeah, it does happen more often than you think. Once you've had your first person hit by lightning outside in the fields, you're like, okay, I always need to have a lightning rod out there. And as you can also see, is I was quite happily going about doing some expeditions. I still didn't get any weapons out of it, but I did, obviously, I unlocked the radio, and I also later on, I don't know if it was before this or after that, I haven't seen it when I've been scanning through the footage, but I also got the option to get carbon armor, which is something I do really like having. It's a great bit of armor to have, and it's actually really easy to produce. I think it's easier to produce than the synthetic armor. I also, as you can see, had put out my freezer there to store my cooked meals and my grain in. That allowed me to cook 2 types of meal. I was just doing porridge and the vegetable stew. And I also had a day-night sensor, I think, by this point. I'm pretty sure I did at this point here. But if not, very soon around about here. I put one out because it meant that I could make sure that things like the soldering bench that weren't going to be used during the night weren't taking up power. And it also meant that I could turn off the cooker during the day, so that if, for example, people did get up early, start eating, Emmeline wouldn't be drawn away from anything she was doing, and she would only cook in the night when she got up. Something I had noticed that had started to be a problem by this point was that I was getting enemy spawns or aggressive animal spawns right on my wall, and that's a problem, obviously, because if they spawn right next to your base, there's nothing you can do to path them, and they'll just start attacking the walls, and they'll just gradually go through the walls unless you attack them. It's not a problem when it's small animals, like the situation here that made me do this. But when it's larger animals, yeah, that's a real big issue. Like, you definitely need the walls there. My attempt to stop that was by putting out these little bunkers around the outside, and I thought maybe that would stop them spawning. Nah, didn't do anything. I don't know what the criteria is that they choose the spawning distance, but all I know is it needs fixing. It wasn't long after that I finally had my Shrieker attack that I've been talking about. Obviously, I must have in my head vastly inflated the numbers, thinking, oh god, it must have been so many, but it was actually only 38 of them. But still, that was 38 creatures before I had any sort of turrets up. And yeah, so it wasn't a pleasant experience to deal with. Now, my plan did work. I mean, it did enable me to draw them in and get them trapped. And I'm sure that if I had had turrets up, it would have been a lot easier. But as you can see, it really wasn't that effective. There was just so many of them, and I still didn't have any sort of high-powered weapons. I had been going and doing a lot of salvaging, but yeah, I hadn't got any. I'd been doing expeditions, I hadn't got any. So it was becoming really clear to me that I'm either going to have to get turrets up ASAP, or, I'm going to have to find some other way of dealing with this. This didn't go too badly. I did manage to deal with them all, and I think I took a few injuries here and there, but in general, yeah, it did work. But it just became really obvious to me that I had clearly made a mistake here by having this many traps and sort of escalating up the amount of creatures that I was going to get. And if it got worse, this was not going to be something that I was going to be able to keep up. So yeah, as you can see, the actual damage that everyone took, it wasn't that bad. But the thing is, I had thrown everything that I had against that attack, and I had only just about dealt with it. If there had been a few more, that probably wouldn't have gone that well at all. I realised that I definitely was going to have to address that problem quite quickly. So after this, I did kind of try and beeline towards getting my turrets up and getting my crafting sorted out. It's like, okay, this is crunch time. I really need to get the base sorted out. The problem is that while I was sorting out the base and doing this, I thought that I still probably had quite a lot of time. I wasn't going to expand the base defenses that badly. The defenses that I was going to build weren't going to make the attacks that much worse. And worst comes to worst, you know, I could still, if I got attacked like this, I could still have them up against the traps and then sort of draw them into the turrets to finish them off if need be. So I wasn't really at panic stations, but I was well aware that this was not going to work, and I did need to address it quite quickly. The problem is that after a little bit more gameplay and working on like my setup for my crafting area, making sure that my turrets were getting researched, things like that, I took a break, and when I came back, the patch had hit, and that really did change everything. So this bit of footage is going to be a little bit action-packed, but first of all, you can see that I've already reduced the size of my wall significantly, and I've reduced it down to a single line of traps. This had no real function other than I just wanted it to look nice. You know, I'd got rid of all the trees over there, and I wanted it to look nice. Later on, you actually see the effect of that, and it looks okay. It's not fantastic. But as you can see, this was the first time that I had an attack after the patch, and I was having a wee bit of an oh crap moment because, yeah, all I'd got up was some fortifications, a single turret, and another set of flamethrowers. I didn't think this was going to go particularly well. Luckily, I didn't have a huge number of those. Oh, what are they called? Shriekers. There we go. You'd think that maybe I've obviously got some trauma going on here that I can't remember their name. But yeah, so when that attack came in, it was real panic stations because I realized that these attacks are now a lot more serious than they used to be. So I'm going to be honest here, is when I'm doing these videos, I save it every 2 or 3 days just to, or at any sort of intervals where, you know, if I had a crash, I would be able to reload it and carry on. I took advantage of that because I wanted to test out a few different ways of dealing with these new multiple attacks. So there was a little bit of reloading that went on here because I really did need to nail down a way to deal with them. The first one that I tried doing was being a little bit proactive, going against the creatures, and that wasn't too bad, but that actually ended up going pretty badly if I managed to aggro the really big creatures. Now, later on, once you do have hold of like really good guns and you got people in armor, it's not such a problem. But, you know, at this point here, if you've been unlucky with the scavenging like I have, and on top of that, you know, if you've made the sort of mistakes that I have, it's really not viable to do it. I was still using bows and like one pistol. This wasn't viable to do. The first thing that I went about trying to deal with this problem was I extended out my wall that I had around here. And as you can see, I've actually moved the turret so that the closest point where anything wanting to get to the turret would have to go into where the flamethrowers are. This is what I talked about earlier on. It's something I'd intended to do, but I'd kind of been a little bit lazy. I really prioritized that, and that did make a big difference on these attacks here. But still, I had to deal with the shriekers. But as you can see, with the attack that's about to happen, it worked out pretty well. By making sure that the easiest place for those big creatures to get at the turrets was right where the flamethrowers were, as you can see, that kind of dealt with that issue there. But what this was really highlighting as I dealt with this attack was that I wasn't going to be able to rely on my turrets hitting the ranged things in time for them to deal with the ranged things. So normally, you know, a single turret there, that probably would do a fair amount of damage against those shriekers there, and I would be able to deal with them with my guys. But because it was concentrating on all those little runners that came in, by the time it actually started attacking them, yeah, it was just insufficient. Although I'd been really unlucky with getting ranged weapons from the scavenging, one thing I'd been very lucky with was getting more CPUs than I needed at the time, and I had also got myself a lot of electronics. So I made a decision that I was going to put my crafting hall on the back burner, and I was just going to completely concentrate on getting myself a good defense setup. It was quite obvious to me that I was going to have to flip it around. I couldn't do what I currently was doing, which was the turrets deal with most stuff, and then anything that gets through, or if there's too many for the turrets to deal with, the flamethrowers finish it off. I was clearly going to have to deal with those fast runners and those big creatures first, so the turrets could deal with anything else afterwards, like the ranged things. Because at the moment, the turrets weren't going to hit the ranged things fast enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this video here, And the next video is going to be me just kind of iterating through and gradually developing my defense. And then you can see the point where I ended up at. But if you just want to see the defense that I ended up doing, I do have a guide video up where I showed what I eventually came up with and what seemed to work for several years after this as the attacks got worse. It did work pretty damn well, but the next video is going to be me showing you the stages that I went through to get there. It's mostly just going to be that. And then the videos after that will be continuing with the playthrough once I had a solid defense up. I know there were a few flops in this video, but hopefully it does help you avoid making the same mistakes, and you can kind of see the thought process that led to those mistakes. Yeah, I know, I've really buggered up there. And I do apologise for the reload, but in all fairness, they did drop a massive mechanics change on us, like in the middle of this, out of nowhere on me, so I think that's understandable. Right guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Catch you all soon. Have fun. Bye.